Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. So good to have you with us. And this is for April 3rd, 2022. You can listen, of course, anytime you wish. And we are looking at Genesis chapter 1 and the creation that God did there in 6 literal days. He rested on the seventh. And starts out in beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. And so he created the heavenly realm where he abode, and the angels, and they watched as the earth was founded. It says so in the book of Job. And then the earth was formless and void. By that we take that didn't have any features. There was no islands, no lands, no mountains. It was formless. There was no form except it was round, and all just water, you see, that you could see, and void, meaning no animal life, plant life, anything like that. And so it had this structure, and the earth was formless and void. Did not, it, some people try to interpret the earth became formless and void, try to put a gap in there, but that just doesn't work linguistically or by context. And it says here, there was darkness and over the surface of the deep, meaning a lot of water. I've seen various reports. One was 7,500 feet of water. Another report I just read today, 12,000 feet of water. I don't know how you can figure that out one way or the other, but nevertheless, it's a lot of water. And the Spirit of God was moving over the surface of the waters, kind of brooding over it and caring for it. The Spirit of God is often associated with water. Then God said, and I take that to be the second person of the Godhead, let there be light, and there was light, and 186,000 miles per second in its ability to move, and essential for life, for photosynthesis, for energy, for radiation. And there was light, and God saw the light was good, and God separated the light from the darkness, put a spin on the earth, so there was a night shadow, and he called the night, the darkness, night, and there was evening and morning, day one. Well, now we come to day two, and this is really what we're going to be preaching on today as the second and third days. And God said, let there be an expanse in the midst of the waters. So you had all that, either 7,000 feet or 12,000 feet of water, and God was going to put an air pocket in there. Now, if you get the impression that it's going to be like a sea of water suspended up above, and then a sea of water below it, and an air pocket in between, you got the wrong impression. When it says he's going to put water up above, remember that on the earth, the perspective was that there was going to be stars on day four that were for signs and for seasons. Well, that implies that someone on the earth could see through that water. Otherwise, they couldn't see the stars. They couldn't see the sun or the moon. So water vapor is what we really need to have in mind. And the water vapor was up there, um, and we have water vapor now up in the air. Now, if it gets really thick, it makes clouds. But water vapor can be just suspended in the air up above. We can a lot of times see through that. It isn't cloud thickness. And if we were to have um, all of the vapor suspended in the earth up above fall all at once, it would rain for 1 hour and give 1 inch of water over the entire earth. But when the flood came, uh, there was 40 days and nights of rain, and assuming it would be the same rate, that means that there would have to be quite a bit more vapor up in the sky. Pardon me. And that would be the equivalent of 80 feet of rain on the earth in those 40 days and nights, raining continuously. So at one time, there was a whole lot more water vapor up in the sky. And someone might say, well, how could all that water vapor be up there and it not rain? Well, truth of the matter is, water vapor can be up in the sky and suspended, and in that vapor state, without falling down, there are places like Venus, where all of the water is vapor, all of it. And why doesn't it rain? Well, could be that it doesn't have the particulates. Vapor needs particulates to form around little grains of sand or pieces of dust, and then it can rain. So if you have a pure atmosphere, all that vapor can be up there and it won't fall down. We understand that when um, when it rained um, at the flood, 40 days and 40 nights, there was a breaking up of the fountains of the deep. If you look at Genesis 7 and verse 11, 7 verse 11, and this is talking about the Noahic flood. It says, the fountains of the great deep burst open, and the floodgates of the sky were opened. See, there's an order. The fountains of the great deep opened up, and then the floodgates of the sky were opened. Well, the fountains of the great deep. Well, that could be water that was in some way or another entrapped into the bowels of the earth. And we probably had some of that when he made the earth appear. There was water that soaked down into the earth, and there might have been an artesian production of the river of Eden from that. But fountains of the deep could also be volcanic magma being spewed up into the sky. We had Mount St. Helens in my lifetime that blew its top, and there was particulates all across the United States of America. The skies, summers were darker and cooler because of that. I remember in the 1980s that happened. And so it could be particulates that were thrown up into the sky from magma and volcanoes. And then these particulates were there for the water to crystallize around, form around, and fall. So once it gets like that, it would be that. Now, someone said, well, how do you know all this, Pastor? I mean, you just making this up? Well, no, I'm not. I have two books I've been drawing upon. One is The Early Earth by Dr. John Whitcomb, and The World That Perished by Dr. John Whitcomb. He happened to be a member of my previous church, and I knew him quite well. And he wrote books on the Genesis flood and also on the creation of the earth. And so a lot of this information I get from him, and he was world renowned for his information that he knew about this. But we have all this water on this earth, 7,000 feet of water, maybe 12,000, and it's because we're in the Goldilocks zone. It's not too hot, it's not too cold. And because of that, we have all this water. Now, if we were Venus, Venus is too close. They have water, but it's all vapor, been vaporized. Um, if you have a distance farther from the sun, you skip over Earth and you become Mars. They have water, but it's locked up in the poles where it's just ice. And so as a result, we are not too hot and not too cold. And as a result, we had lots and lots of water. So there was no rain. There was a mist that went up over the earth and watered the earth. And that's what happens in fall when the earth is cool, um, or when it's cool and the air is warmer, and so you get dew on the grass, you see. And so that was how it happened. And there was no rainbow until after the flood because rainbows are sunlight shining through rain droplets in the sky. And so that tells you quite a bit. At any rate, this vapor was up there in the sky and was brought down by the particulates, most likely from magna and other pollutants caused by the breaking up of the deep. As we continue on, so God made an expanse in the midst of this water vapor up above and the seas down below. And so he put this expanse in there, and it separated the waters which were below the expanse from the waters which were above the expanse, and it was so. And God called the expanse heaven. Now, a little bit about this expanse. This is that air pocket where birds fly, and a lot more than that, though. It goes up quite a bit higher. But if we were to assume, and we might not be totally correct about this, but if we were to assume that the air mixture back then was the air mixture it is now, we would say that the air mixture had 78% nitrogen, 21% oxygen, 0.9%, not quite 1%, argon, and 0.07% everything else. So this nitrogen actually dilutes the oxygen, mixes in with it, and keeps it from being combustible. If you've ever seen somebody who is on oxygen and they have a little tank there and there might be a sticker on the door, no smoking please, oxygen in use, because pure oxygen is quite flammable. It really can start a fire. If you take oxygen away, you just can't have a burning at all. It's just not possible. But you mix nitrogen in with the oxygen and it dilutes it enough that fires are not uncontrollable. And so when we breathe that air, we have a mixture of nitrogen and oxygen as we're taking that in and are breathing. And that's good for us. Now, the nitrogen, as you know, nitrogen is very important for plants. You take nitrates and you put them on plants, and they just love you for it. That's just wonderful. And so nitrogen is good for the plants, and oxygen good for the animals, and it works really good. So the nursery for plant life and the nursery for animals is being set up. Then you also have the sea, and the sea, this air pocket, the sea of air rather, has some qualities that we have come to appreciate. Sound can carry, but if you have a vacuum, no sound can go through there. So our ability to talk to one another is very important to us, and because of the air and its makeup, we're able to hear each other. There is a weight. There is a weight on the. Uh, it has mass, and because it has mass, it can support the birds as they want to fly through it. And basically, the birds are swimming through the air as they have a mixture. You know, we swim in the sea and we'll go like this and it'll move us along. Well, they're able to swim in the air. There is some weight and some mixtures of gases that enable them to kind of get a grip on things and move along. That's very, very good. Later on, we learned to make airplanes and fly in this air pocket. You know, and when heated gas rises, and then it cools as it rises, and so you have this rising and this cooling and rising and this cooling, and hot air rises and cool air falls. That's why when you have an air conditioner, it's best if you have the air conditioner come in from the top and the water it falls. And if you have heat, you bring it in from the bottom and it rises up. But at any rate, um, they're breezes, and it makes those breezes and air movement on the earth. Of course, it has all kinds of benefits. When the earth became more violent after the flood, you have tornadoes and cyclones and hurricanes, but before that, there weren't those great breezes. The ozone layer bounces off radiation, and if meteors tried to come into the atmosphere, it'd build up the heat and burn them up before they hit the earth. And the ionosphere, later on, our radio, we could bounce off the waves and they come back down to earth and we could hear the radio waves. There's also a greenhouse effect. You had this water canopy all the way around the earth, and the earth was therefore more temperate. It wasn't as hot at the equator, and it wasn't nearly as cold at the poles. And I was very interested in what I was reading here about woolly mammoths, and is an estimated 5 million mammoths whose remains are buried all along the coastline of northern Siberia and Alaska. They're still finding mammoths today, and they were frozen and buried not many thousands of years ago. 5 million mammoths, and some of these mammoths were so quick frozen that they could eat them. And they opened up their stomachs and they looked at what the plant material was that they had in them. And although these mammoths were found in like Siberia and in Alaska, they had subtropical, not tropical, but subtropical plants in their stomachs, not fully digested, and they could tell what they were. Now, how in the world could they have subtropical plants in their stomachs and they be a creature that was quick frozen, 5 million of them up in the polar regions? It was because before the flood, it was more subtropical, more moderate in its temperature, and massive amounts of herds of elephants could be supported. These animals ate a lot of food, and so there was a lot of grass and there was a lot of plants and things that they could eat. It was quite lush. 5 million of them could be supported. And then all of a sudden, they're quick frozen. Well, how could that happen? Because the drastic thing happened, or the ice canopy, well, not ice canopy, vapor canopy was completely destroyed, and suddenly there was a quick freeze, and these animals were buried by the flood and quick frozen. So that explains quite a few things as far as I'm concerned from that standpoint. Very intriguing at any rate. It kind of gives you an understanding. Um, Now, on day 3, God causes the dry land to appear. Let's look at this. Um, verse 9. Then God said, let the waters below the heavens be gathered into one place, and let the dry land appear. And it was so. Now, how did God, practically speaking, if we were to describe it in layman's terms, how did he make that land appear? Had all that water and it was on top of things. He could probably take the surface and do something like this. And as he did something like this drew the water down into this pocket. And as he raised it up, the tops of this kind of appeared above the water. And that became continents. There were mountains and plains and things like that. And also, the water could have sunk down into the ground, or God could have put it down in there, of course, also. And dry land began to appear. So you had islands and mountains, but it's purported to have been practically one giant landmass, one great continent, thought of that way. And so the dry land appeared. And I would have to say that the dry land that appeared and the trenches that were made, the mountains were not as high as they are now, and the trenches were not as deep as they are now. And when the God broke up the fountains of the deep and had the water rain, he could cover all of that land with the water that he brought up and the rain that he brought down, and it covered the highest mountains to the point of being a little bit below the draft of what the ark was when it sunk. And then when the waters began to recede, eventually the ark would settle in on the mountains of Ararat, and the water just kept receding, and they got out. But at any rate, I look at this and I see that the land appears. So now he is getting the nursery ready for the land to appear, the land animals. He made the nursery ready for the water animals. He made the nursery ready for the animals that'll be in the air. And now he's getting the nursery ready for the animals that will be on the earth. And of course, the animals that are in the air have to have trees which are on the earth, and so that's connected there. Let the waters below the heavens be gathered into one place, and let the dry land appear. And it was so. God called the dry land earth, and the gathering of the waters he called seas, and God saw that it was good. Now he's not done, though, on day 3. Then God said, second person of the Godhead, because he's the Word, let the earth sprout vegetation, plants yielding seed, and fruit trees on the earth bearing fruit after their kind, with seed in them, and it was so. Now this is kind of very interesting, because here you have plants like trees, and they're bearing fruit. They already have fruit on them, and then in the fruit are the seeds to make the next generation of fruit trees. But this fruit tree is not a day old, and it's mature, and it has fruit hanging on it, and it has seeds in it. And so if you were to look at that tree, you'd say, well, that tree might be 20 years old. Today with the varieties and things that they develop, if you plant a little stick of a fruit tree, 5 years, maybe you can get yourself an apple. But you know, this was this very lush, strong tree, a lot of them all over the earth, and they had the fruit on them, and they also had seeds in them. You know, our Lord, there was a battle over who's really the big shot priest when the Lord was having the tabernacle, and he said, okay, everybody, you bring your walking stick, and we'll put it in the tabernacle, and then I'll show you who I pick. And so they did this, and Aaron's rod was there. Must have been, maybe about that long. Why do I know that? Because they took that rod that Aaron had and they put it inside the ark, and the ark was, just like 3.5 feet wide. So that's why I said it was only about like that. But when they got to that rod, that Aaron's rod, it not only had budded overnight, it had leaves on it, it had flowered, and it had produced almonds. It had nuts on it. And so it must have been an almond rod at one time that they made a walking stick out of. So just overnight, it looked like it had matured. Well, that's the mark of God, because God did this here. And, you'd look at that just like you'd look at Adam and Eve on day 6, and you'd say, well, they're grown adults. No, they're grown and they're adults, but they're not that age. They're only a day old, even less than a day. They had the appearance of age. And so you had these full grown trees, and you had full grown animals, and they could have babies, and they could take care of the little babies. The chicken came first, and then came the eggs. They had fruit trees, and all this stuff looked like it had been around a long time, but it wasn't. Now, none of that that I know of survived except one thing. Those are things that were up in the sky, because God created the sun and the moon and the stars also, and for them to be any use to the people on the earth as for signs and seasons and days and years, they had to not only be out there, but God had to have the light get all the way to the earth just in a little bit of time. And so they have the appearance of age, but they're not that old. How do I know that? Because God said so. And so as we look at these things and we still see them, oh, that's billions of years up there, and the light just took that long to get to us. No, God had created the star and the light from the star to the earth so that it could be used to us. And we have been fooling ourselves to think that they're that old. So I had the appearance of age. Very interesting concept, I might add. And so the earth brought forth vegetation, plants yielding seed after their kind, and trees bearing fruit with seed in them after their kind. And God saw that it was good. There was evening and there was morning, a third day. And I might want to point out to you that in chapter 2 of Genesis, it then kind of takes the shift away, and it says we want to look a little bit more at the Garden of Eden. And the Garden of Eden and the plants and other things were probably created on this particular day. But this is kind of a flashback to kind of look at the Garden of Eden in chapter 2. And so the sea, land, Air nurseries are nearly ready for animal life. So God is doing things in an orderly fashion, step by step. That's his modus of operandi. He's orderly and he does things in steps, and he's still the same God. And these things that he creates have tremendous complexities, and they're made of atoms, and they're using the earth and all of the nutrients in it, and they are helping one another, and there's a way for them to be watered, and all that stuff that goes on. He's setting that up. You see, just like a man and a woman, they've got 9 months to get ready for a baby, and so they get the nursery ready and all these little things they're doing. The Lord is doing the same thing. Matter of fact, we kind of take a page from him rather than him from us. And we see how he got everything ready to bring the animals and man upon the earth. The nursery is getting ready. Our great and marvelous Creator God.